This is Wade. He's a Wendigo. He's also the main antagonist of the iDrive for Cerber comic books by Instinct Comics. I'll drop a link in the description. We're going to cover blocking with rudimentary shapes, secondary and tertiary sculpting, as well as setting it up for 3D printing with cutting and keying. So let's start in with blocking. I want to bring in an image plane that I'm going to be using to model from. So you go to Texture, Image Plane, and then Load Image. And then we're going to go find that image. Now that we have that loaded, I'm going to toggle into edit mode and move it back a little bit so that the imported geometry that I'm using doesn't clip through the image plane. Then for our first piece of geometry, we'll append a sphere. I need to be able to see the image plane behind the model, so I toggle on transparency and turn off ghost. And then I start using the move topological to push and pull everything into place. I'm going to add another sphere that I make more egg-shaped for the rib cage, and then more elongated spheres for the different segments of the legs. I'm using the curved multi-tube brush here to pull out some quick cylinders that will become the antlers, and then I'll just smooth out the tips to taper them. I'm pulling another sphere for the ears, squash and stretch that into place, and then the damn standard to kind of push in the ear hole, and then I Z-remesh it to give some nice quad topology. Back to the rib cage, I use the clip curve brush to give the flat plane of the bottom ribs. Pull my leg stumps out a little more to resemble feet, and then I'll use that same clip curve brush to flatten the bottoms. I want to add some talony toenails, and for that I'll use the cone, move that into place, and then smooth, inflate, and move topological again to make it look more appropriate. Then move it into place and duplicate it 2 other times and spread them out. I use a damn standard brush here to carve in the tendony areas. Probably one of my favorite brushes. Although I just have discovered the Geo brush, which you can find on ZBrush Central. It's amazing. Give it a look. And now I use the same brush to carve in some details on his face as well as a jawline. Every Wendigo needs a solid jawline. I'll add some smooshed spheres here for placeholder eyes as I want to make the final results out of resin. I try again to draw a mask to punch in the eyes with, but it always keeps coming out blurry. I forgot to set my focal shift to 100, so instead I just end up growing and sharpening the mask. Hindsight's 2020. I move those vertices in, and as I'm sculpting on it, I'm realizing that the vertices are folding, which isn't the result I want. I want a nice clean edge loop around here so that the edges stay. I wanted a perfect circle in its own poly group, so I tried the slice circle brush, but I couldn't for the life of me get it mirrored across. So I ended up just retracing my steps, using the mask that I had, and then group by mask, and then polishing that to make it more circular. Then I'll use ZModeler to punch that whole poly group in to create some eye sockets. And then I'll use that same method of masking, poly grouping, and ZModeler extrusion to make his mouth hole. I wanted some more malleable, move brush friendly topology, so I'm going to use the ZBrush. Now the keep groups toggle is crucial here. After doing it once, I realized that there's not enough topology around the mouth, so I'm going to use the slice curve brush to carve out a polygroup around the lip line, and that way it'll retain the mouth better when I ZBrush. Now, I wasn't really happy with the first go around here, so what I ended up doing is just bumping the polygon count up to 2000 and changing the adaptive size down to 30 so the polygons would be a little more square. And with the topology looking much better, it's time to smooth out those eye sockets. Now that I know where the eye holes are, I can better move the eyeballs into place. I push and pull his nose hole to get it looking a little more skeleton-y. And then I refine the bottom of the zygomatic, also referred to as your cheekbones. We're gonna add a sphere for the pelvis, move that into place, and then I can use the clip curve to make that more pelvis-y. And ZBrush actually gave me pretty clean results this time around. I'm gonna smoosh his mouth into that more of that adorable goofy grin. And it's time to start adding teeth. But what shape should I use for the teeth? They kind of all have the same problem of having a pole vector at the top and bottom. Even the cube at the top and bottom has pole vectors. That was a choice, ZBrush. We can, however, fix this with a little known option and initialize. You can hit the Q cube, and that will give you quad topology cubes. So now we're going to form that into something that more resembles a tooth. I subdivide and sharpen up the tooth. Move that into place at the front of his mouth, and that's when my ADD kicks in and I realize that nothing in my scene is named or merged properly. So I'm going to go through and just kind of clean everything up. And with that out of the way, I can begin duplicating and placing all the teeth in his snaggletooth grin. I merge them all together, do a quick polygroup auto, and then I start moving them back and forth, embedded into his gums. For his waist, a cylinder will do the trick. And another cylinder for his arms. Now I always bend the arms in the bind pose because it helps sell a little bit of realism to the character, but if you're a tech artist or rigger and you hate it, let me know. I'm going to use a cube for the hand, but I'm going to initialize it again because that godforsaken topology. For the fingers, I'm going to use a curve multi-tube again to just drag those out. And you'll notice that the curved multi-tube has a tendency to twist, which looks hideous. But it did give me rough placement for the knuckles, so that's kind of a win. After I get the placement down, I'm going to ZRemesh just so I can get more user-friendly topology. And then I'm going to duplicate the fingers and rotate them so they feel a little more natural. For the antlers, I have them merged into their own individual groups, and I'm just going to dynamesh them and smooth them out. And then when I'm happy with the shape, ZRemesh them. Do that again for this group. And the smallest antlers are actually okay. And then I'm going to pull forward his gum line. And that's a mistake I see a lot of early artists make, myself included, is look at a skull and see just how far out the mandible and maxilla come out in front of the eyes. Now I'm going to reposition the teeth because I kind of jumped the gun on that a little earlier. You might be asking why I don't punch a mouth hole all the way in, and that's because this is for 3D print, and I really don't feel like pulling out a bunch of filament and having to deal with supports and stuff like that. Now I merged down the leg segments, and it's time to give that a quick retopology also. I widen out the deltoid muscle, which is a hard muscle to make look right. And then I use the damn standard to just knock in some quick definition. Angle the thumb to make it feel a little more relaxed. And I'm going to subdivide and kind of mash everything together. I merged it all together and then dynamesh it to make it one solid mesh. And then to retopologize it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the clip curve brush. Much like the face, this will give me more control over where I want the edge loops to fall when I retopologize. And as I'm sculpting the forearm, I'm realizing that it kind of looks more like a tibia and fibula than it does a radius and ulna. I'll give his tendons some definition in the hands. As well as beef out his thumb palm area. I'll scale up his hands a little bit, which will sell his miniature stature. Then finally, I'll push the antlers into the head. And that'll do it for this segment. Stay tuned for the next one where I will be going into the secondary details. Thanks. See ya.